Number 1. The tunnel. I grew up well out in the country. I never even saw a city until I was in my late teens. For me, going out and playing in the fields, climbing trees, climbing hills, that was the sort of thing I was used to growing up. Doing things like playing baseball with sticks, and other things of the sort. But of course, some things became really boring over time, and we always had to find new ways to entertain ourselves. And with some young boys from the country, sometimes we did some pretty stupid things. I was hanging out with 3 other male friends at the time. We were all the same age, maybe around 10, 11 years old. And we couldn't find anything interesting to do on this day. It was a nice, long, hot summer day. So we decided to just walk down by the creek. We brought a few glass jars with us, just in case we saw some salamanders, and wanted to try and catch them. So this was midday at some point. Me and my buddies were walking around, barefoot at this point. Sometimes walking in the creek, sometimes walking on the shore of the creek. And we walked pretty far down. Now at one point, we came to an opening. I think it's called a culvert or some sort of tunnel. We had always known it was there, but we never knew exactly where it came from. So my friends and I started talking. We were wondering if one of us had the bravery to go through the tunnel and find out where it led out. Now, of course, none of us actually wanted to do this. We just wanted to dare each other to do it. And then we see which one of us would not chicken out. After some daring, some double daring, some double dog daring, and stuff like that, everybody kept daring back over and over again, and I was wondering if we were going to get to like a 15 dog dare or something. Finally, I decided that I would be the one to do it. It was set a little bit off the ground, on the side of a hill, so I had to grab onto the tunnel itself and lift myself up into it. I can tell you at this point I was completely and utterly terrified, but I couldn't let my friends know that. So I began crawling through the tunnel. Now, first thing I can tell you is, of course, it was very wet. And the second thing I can tell you is there wasn't really any light. I couldn't see the opening at the end of this tunnel, so I had absolutely no idea how far the tunnel stretched through the hill and then came out of wherever it came out of. I was getting more and more scared the further and further I went into this tunnel. I was able to peek back and see that I could still see the opening on the other side. I did have a wristwatch, which gave off a little bit of light, so I found that if I shone it in front of me, I would be able to see just a tiny bit ahead of me. So I would do this occasionally. I would crawl a couple more feet, I would lift my arm up, turn on the light on the watch, and look forward and see where I was going. After what seemed like a while, I realized I hadn't really made it as far as I thought that I had. The tunnel was sort of confining, and I did have some claustrophobic feelings, which may have made it feel a lot longer than it was. I don't know if it was the 5th or 6th time that I shined the light on through the tunnel that I saw something that scared the holy crap out of me. I distinctly saw a bat hanging inside the tunnel, right up in front of me. However, it just seemed to be there. It didn't seem in any way like it noticed me or knew that I was there, but I froze and was terrified, not knowing what else to do. Thinking the only thing I could do was crawl backwards, which wasn't very easy since I could not turn around, I began doing that, and doing that very, very slowly. After crawling backwards for a while, I heard one of my friends shout, "Oh, look at it, he's chickening out." We knew he was too scared to make it. I didn't really care about that, and I would defend myself once I got out of the tunnel. So I kept crawling back, but then I heard something. It was a loud pinging and a clanging noise, and I realized, oh no, my friends were throwing rocks at me into the tunnel. "Stop that," I yelled at them. "There's a bat in here." I don't know if they heard me too late, or were ignoring me altogether, because a few more rocks pinged into the tunnel. One of them flew past me, and then I heard it. I heard the bat start screeching, and then it flew, hitting me as it passed me, and then making its way out to the end of the tunnel. I was panicked at that mode, so I started backing up very, very quickly. I heard my friends start screaming, which meant the bat probably had flown out of the tunnel already. But I was still terrified because I didn't know if there were maybe more in there. They had stopped throwing rocks at me, and they were just instead screaming. When I was able to get to the end of the tunnel, I noticed that my friends were gone. I saw them running far down the creek, back in the way that we came. I jumped out of the tunnel onto the ground, and then took off right after them. I was really, really pissed off at them for throwing those rocks into the tunnel. But, fortunately for me, none of them thought I was a coward for not making it all the way through, and even if they did, they didn't have any room to talk since they all screamed and ran away from a bat. Number 2. The bully. It surprises and saddens me how many people have scary stories about their childhood when they've been picked on by bullies. I have quite a few of them actually, but there's one that I want to share because it was particularly terrifying. When I was 13 years old, I was very, very small for my age. My family lived in a town in the rural areas in Ohio, and I was unfortunately bullied in school and bullied whenever I went out of the house to play. However, my dad was always adamant that we go out of the house and play anyways. The only place I ever felt comfortable in was inside my home. Well, my older brother often hung out with other bullies too, so I didn't hang out with him, of course, because those kind of guys didn't like me. So when I was on these you have to go outside and play missions, I was generally made to go out be by myself. And that's what I did on this day. I was walking around and just enjoying nature and walking down the roads and the hills that we lived on. As I was walking, I was coming up upon this old abandoned property, and I heard some voices coming from the property. I tried my best to be quiet as I was walking down the dirt road past that house, but unfortunately, that didn't help, as someone noticed me, and unfortunately, it was some of the bullies that had bothered me around here and around at school, and they noticed that I was there, and they noticed that I was alone, so they began chasing after me. Now, like I said, I was a very small kid, so it was very unlikely that I was going to be able to outrun them, but that didn't mean I didn't try. Finally, one of them tackled me hard onto the dirt road and held me while I struggled, while the other bullies came over and helped him pick me up, and for some reason I didn't understand, they dragged me back to that house that they were at, the abandoned one, and they took me in the backyard. And when they took me in the backyard, I realized why they had taken me there. There was an old well in the backyard. It was boarded up over the top, and they took me over there where two of the bullies held me. The other one grabbed the board on top of the well and began pulling it off. And I went really scared at that point. I was just terrified that they were going to throw me down that well, and there was nothing I could do about it. The only thing I could think of was to scream for help and start to struggle. I got punched and I got told to be quiet, but hell, what were they going to do to me if I wasn't quiet? If they were planning on throwing me down this well to begin with, I might as well try to get some help. So I kept screaming and I got punched again, but I kept calling out over and over again and struggling with every amount of strength that I had to keep these bullies from throwing me down that well. But I was pretty convinced I was going to be going, and the opening to the well was more than enough for me to fall down into it. But I kept screaming, and when they got me up against the well, I held on, making it as difficult as possible, struggling and screaming and just really going crazy. And that's when I heard a voice. What the fuck is going on here? It was not a voice I recognized, but it was the voice of an adult. And as soon as I heard that voice, all the hands that were holding me and trying to push me into the well stopped. I turned and I saw an older gentleman, but a very big older gentleman. The bullies started explaining that they were only playing, they weren't really going to do anything. But the old guy didn't believe and asked me what was going on. Even though the bullies were threatening me to hurt me if I told him anything, I told the old man the truth of what was going on. He knew the 3 bullies and told them to get their asses home, or he would be talking to all their dads tonight. The 3 bullies then ran away, cursing as they did so. The old man asked me if I was all right, and I said, "Yeah. How did you find me?" He said, "I was just driving by, and I heard you screaming and yelling, and I had to come back here and see what was going on. Boy, for such a small kid, you sure can scream." "Yeah," I told him, "the bullies told me to be quiet or they'd punch me more." The old man told me I was very brave and very lucky that I didn't listen to them and started screaming, because that was a very deep well, and it would be very difficult for anyone to know I was in there if they succeeded in pushing me down. He led me to his pickup truck, and he drove me home. Apparently, though, he decided to go and talk to the fathers of all the bullies, and all of them got in very deep trouble for what they did to me. Number 3. Coldwater Farmhouse. Coldwater Farmhouse had been built in 1833. It was part of the rural expansion after the cholera epidemic of 1832. People fled the cities and retreated to the country life once more. The house stood on the end of the long meadow, separated by a dirt drive, perched upon a knob. 2 oak trees stood in juxtaposition of one another in a seemingly symbiotic fashion. Their roots pushed down above the ground and twined over one another. The first day I saw it, it seemed like a dream come true. It was a spacious 2-story timeless beauty, but time is a teller of stories, and stories don't always end well. We moved into the farmhouse on my 6th birthday. The August heat and Dad's old Pontiac, piled full of our belongings, melted into one another. I alternated lifting my bare legs from the Naugahyde seat. My parents had chosen this Victorian house because Dad wanted us to learn the old ways. He had grown up on a farm just like Coldwater. The only electricity that would be used was to give my mother a more functional kitchen. Otherwise there was no telephone, no electric lights, no television, nor heating and cooling systems. In the backyard, the well stood close by the screened summer kitchen door. And as a lot of old country farmhouses, the outhouse wasn't too far away. As an adult, I shudder to think how stupid that was. As there was plenty of room in the house, my mother soon invited her younger sister and her 2 children to come stay with us. Late summer curved into fall, and I and my siblings were off to school during the day. This allowed my mother and her sister time to catch up on their own old memories. Daddy was still in another town working. He was in training, so he didn't get home until nearly dark. It was after supper one evening when I heard my mother and my aunt telling my father he had to come look in the attic. Apparently some noise upstairs had frightened them during the day when they were alone in the house. My father knew all the noises that could come from innocent places and old attics. He tried telling them it was probably just a raccoon that found its way there, but my mother, wide-eyed, insisted it was a sound of heavy scratching, like furniture being moved around. Being more nosy than brave, I had to go to the attic myself and inspect. The door creaked slowly open, and the light from the single window fell upon the scene. An old desk and old chair, set as if it had recently been vacated. I drew my finger across the dusty desk and walked to the enclave window. Now from this view I saw a thin, pale woman, beneath one of the oak trees. Her wavy auburn hair seemed tethered to the dancing sun rays, and it was hard to tell where one began and the other ended. Suddenly, I was spooked by the sound of the rickety chair moving behind me. I turned to look, but no one was there. I just saw the tracks of the chair legs and the dancing floor dust. When I looked through the window, the woman was gone. What I witnessed took a lifetime to place together. In that house, several generations of the same family had lived. But somewhere in the 1940s, it had become a rental property. The house had been rented to a young married couple, already saddled with several small children. The young husband and father, coming home from the war, had changed. He began to drink heavily, either fighting the demons already there or calling them to him with his Machiavellian behavior. One rainy day in September, shortly before my aunt went back to Tennessee, the winding thread of the story continued. Daddy had replaced the old tires on the old Pontiac, leaving them lined in rows, 2 by 2. We, as many poor children do, quickly made play of them, each of us like stair-steps, seeing who could most quickly navigate them without falling. It began to sprinkle. The worn, dry soil puddled the water on its crust. Dad pulled up in the old Pontiac and began to blow the horn. Mom, her sister, and babies quickly ran to the car. Their heads dodged down to avoid the pelting autumn rain. My oldest brother turned and demanded, "Come on, we've got to go right now." Both brothers ran to the car as the rain began to fall harder, in thick teardrop pellets. I wanted to try one more time to run the old tires when I realized the old Pontiac was driving down the driveway. Red taillights grew smaller and dimmer in the blinding rain. I had to catch my breath when I realized they didn't know they had forgotten me. Running, I slipped through the wet leaves of the yard and down the long dirt driveway, but they were gone. I made my way back to the house, in hysterical tears, my curls sagging wet across my small shoulders. Reasoning with myself that they would be back soon, I went to my bed and covered myself from head to toe. Time, held by no clock, passed, and the sun dropped. Still, no one was home. My bed was positioned in front of the long antique window, with the fireplace directly across the room. I peeped one eye from beneath the quilt when I heard a scratching sound. It seemed to be coming from the window. Believing my family was back, I sat up in bed. I threw open the heavy curtain and pressed my face against the dark glass. The auburn-haired woman stared back at me on the other side. A trickle of blood ran out of her mouth and carved its way to the recesses of her milky chin. Not a sound came from her, but she silently formed the words, "Help me." Shockingly, a seemingly unubiquitous hairy arm reached out of the darkness and dragged her away. I began screaming and braced my small hands all over my face. My mother ran into the room quickly, followed by her younger sister. It had all been a dream, no, a nightmare. I was safe and sound in my home with my family, and the sun was still shining. With labored breathing, I told my mother the details of my nightmare. She and my aunt shared an adult look of alarm, and silence landed in the room. It was some years later when I first heard of the man who had murdered his wife in that old farmhouse, and several decades passed before I even heard more. I was not the first to see that woman, as many people in the community had attested. She apparently roams the fields and valleys and the silent, misty graveyards. Some claim to have seen her, with wavy, auburn hair, in her burial gown, walking slowly through the graveyard. Others say she comes to them in dreams, but there's always one thing we all agree on. She is always silently mouthing the words, "Help me." Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.